Okay, so now we're ready for the student programs. And keep in mind, we're going to be looking at the Fall 1 programs because this is Fall 1 data population. All right, and here's our student, Paguline again. And of course, we want to submit programs for the School of Attendance, okay? So our student is going to Emerson Elementary. That's where the program eligibility or participation should be associated. Remember, ownership for student level programs falls within the School of Enrollment. All right, so let's look at the Fall 1 programs here. So all the programs in CalPADS are listed, even the historical programs. That's true with online maintenance, right? So you can see free meal program 181, and then you see free and reduced price meal program 175. So the CalPADS code set will show you the valid program codes. You can filter out those that are retired, and you would find that 175 is not a valid code, right? Training, we cover it. The CalPADS user manual has it as well. All right. So when you're talking about the Fall 1 programs, you're looking at free meal 181. And remember, these programs are in alphabetical order. So reduced price meal 182 is down here, right? So that's your students that qualify for the NSLP, right? Also reported, and when I say reported in Fall 1, they show up on the reports. The counts for these students who are eligible are on the reports. The GATE program, Gifted and Talented Education, is 127, right? Now, the homeless program is reported as part of LCFF counts. However, the actual count of students who are homeless throughout the year is part of end of year. So the homeless program is on reports that are certified in Fall 1 and should be reported for Fall 1, but uh, the actual overall counts are part of end of year. The LIP program are reported, so counts of students in each individual LIP program. And while many of them target and some are specifically designed for English learners, many of these programs are available to students of any English language acquisition status. Okay. And then the last program that you're going to see on reports again is going to be Tribal Foster Youth 193. These students again are like homeless. Their overall counts are provided as part of end of year 1. However, because they're eligible for LCFF funds, they're part of the Fall 1 reports as well. Again, you can report your programs, your student programs at any time, right? If you have a student that's in pregnant or parenting, you can report them in Fall 1, but their counts won't be reflected on reports until end of year, okay? Same with military program. Um, the armed forces family member, that can be reported now when school starts. You know, you have a student that is a child of an active duty or armed forces family member. You can report that when you have that information or when their eligibility is reported to you or you know of their eligibility. However, those counts are going to be reflected on end of year reports. All right, so let's go with program 181 here. You don't want to populate the end date, right? You don't want to populate the membership end date. It will cause GER 5 ownership problems. You don't know if the student's going to transfer in January, so you don't want to predate your programs, okay? Here, student was eligible as of 7/1, right? Beginning of the academic year. And so the rest of these fields, if I am not exiting the student, are conditional fields of validation for other programs. So I don't have to populate anything, right? The student's eligibility uh, is set. Free reduced price meal program as of 7/1, right? We got the NSLP application and we're ready to go. All right, so here we have the data guide. Again, you can download this from the resources in the CalPADS user manual, or you can go to the CalPADS system documents page. You don't have to memorize everything in the contents of the data guide, right? That's almost impossible. I know there's a few geniuses out there, but for most of us, you just need to know the data that's in here, right? What's valuable to you. So I know that under Chapter 2 data groups is the section about student programs, student data overview, and then student program section 2.1.3, right? So if I go directly to that section, there's information. Fall 1 are primarily eligibility programs. So here's the definition of student program eligibility. Eligibility means that a given student has met all the criteria to receive services for an education program. However, the student does not necessarily need to be receiving services. So um, a GATE student might be eligible for GATE and that school may not provide GATE instruction. They still should be a member of the GATE program, okay? The language instruction programs are the exception. LEA should only submit lit program records for the student actually participating in the program, right? So there's guidance here. These are the business rules of how programs and information should be reported in CalPADS. Additionally, each program has guidance about how it should be reported, right? So the free meal program, 181, the start date must be in the current academic year for each reporting year. 7-1, the date I use is in the current academic year. It represents the date the NSLP meal application was received, right? So the student did a pre-enrollment and you received their eligibility on 7-1. That's before the enrollment start date and it's perfectly fine. We show this to show you how it works. Should LEAs close these records at the end of the year when the student exits the school? Again, I want to be clear, or when the student exits the school. Yes, these records should be closed annually, and a new eligibility determination must be made annually. So these records are only good for the academic year at most. Of course, if a student exits and enrolls in a new school within your LEA, they should have another 8181 record for that school. Okay. And then there's guidance for all the different programs. Now, migrant education is recently retired. It's matching, and foster youth is matching. So if you see students identified as foster, the program code for that has long since been retired. But migrant education just recently went to matching. All right. So I just had the opportunity to show you the value of the CalPADS data guide specifically for student programs. It's a great resource. Let's do another one. Now, there is a hierarchy, right? A student might be identified first as reduced price meal. Situations may require that student may take a downturn for their family and they might be eligible for free meals. That's fine. The student can have a 181 and a subsequent 182. They can't overlap, but you can close the 181 and the 182 reduced price meals and open a 181. What you can't do is have overlapping programs with the same date. And if a student qualifies as a 181, and for whatever reason you find information that would qualify the student for a 182, maybe they go to a different school and the parent, part of the enrollment paperwork fills out the application and the circumstances changes for the better, and their income eligibility suggests 182. If you see they have a 181 for that year, they retain that eligibility for the entire year. That hierarchy is the 181, the free reduced lunch for the whole year. Once they qualify for free lunch, they're qualified for that school year. Let's do another program. We're going to add a new record. School of attendance is going to be Emerson, of course. And the program we're going to add, let's do a 191. We'll do today's date. Again, we don't want to exit the program in advance, but now you see conditional fields of validation. As part of the here, let's try to post this program. Now that didn't work because there are conditional fields of validation, right? We triggered two errors. Homeless dwelling type code is missing and unaccompanied youth indicator is missing, right? So we'll scroll down and you see these final two fields. If I use a program code 191, CalPADS requires these two conditional fields, right? So um, we'll say that that student is doubled up, right? Their family's with another family, and no, they're not an unaccompanied youth, right? They're not alone. And so we'll post this. Oh, school of attendance is required. So I got ahead of myself. Again, school of attendance. All right, and we'll post the record. And so again, we see that we have the homeless record here. And again, we have a start date that's before the enrollment start date, the program eligibility start date. And why does that work? Because the homeless program, we're back at the data guide, I'm sorry. The homeless program represents the first day the student was identified as homeless at any school in California. If a student's eligibility is re-verified annually, the previous record should be closed. Again, this is historical guidance. While the start date is good, it can predate the student's enrollment. As of this year, 26-27, the homeless program has to be closed annually. Okay? So there is guidance here. Unfortunately, it is a bit outdated. So you're going to have to use more than one resource, unfortunately. That's just how it goes. But if you read here, it says it has to be verified annually. So the reason why the homeless program has to be closed is to enforce that the student's homeless status is verified annually. Although I am a fan of the instruction and information in the data guide, I do want you to, understand that there have been changes since 2020 in CalPADS, and unfortunately, this hasn't been maintained. So we've reported these two programs. Now, the students will show up on the LCFF report for either of these, right? And because students that are identified as homeless are categorically eligible for free and reduced price meals. So even if that student turned in an NSLP application and the income didn't say they were eligible for 181, the fact that they are homeless does allow them to have a 181 record, okay? And we know this because of the LCFF FAQs. All right, so this is a document that's very valuable for Fall 1. It's valuable in your data collection and reporting. It's the LCFF FAQs on the CDE's web portal. It's linked under FAQs. If you go to the CalPADS system documentation page and you select the link for FAQs, there's several different FAQs and the LCFF FAQs are linked there. Now, it says students are categorically eligible for free reduced price meals, including homeless students code 191. If a student is categorically eligible, right? So if they're identified as migrant as a match now, or if they're a homeless student, or if they're a foster student and they're not also direct cert, it's appropriate to give them a 181 free meal code, okay? Now for this example, if the student's 181 free meal eligibility was determined based on their homeless status, the start date would match, right? They would both have an 8/13 start date. The student is only eligible because of their homeless status. That wasn't the case, right? This student completed the NSLP application in this scenario, and as of the application date, that's 7/1/26. That's when the student became eligible. All right. And then you can exit these programs at the end of the year if the student is there the entire year. If the student leaves when they go to a different school, whether within or outside the district, you can exit the program at that time.